going on, everyone? Nick here, and today we are going to talk about the things that I wish I knew before I bought my R5C. So I don't want this video to seem like I'm getting down on the R5C or think it's a bad camera. I feel like this video will be mostly negative just because it's the things that, I wish I knew that I found out after I got it, and because I took note of them, I guess it's something that I wish was different, but I don't think any of them are deal breakers. I still very much like the R5C, so let me go through those for you, and maybe it'll help you make your decision. Maybe it'll give somebody at Canon, if they ever happen to see this video, some ideas of things, because a lot of this could be fixed in a firmware update. So I'm just going to go down my list I've got here and tell you the things that I found and why I think that they're sort of a problem. Okay, so the first thing is when you are in video autofocus, when you have autofocus enabled, when you are in the video mode. Now, all of these things are in the video mode. Most of them, like the photo mode, works just like the R5, so just take that into account. This is pretty much strictly video only. So the autofocus is always on or always off. So on like the R6 and when you're in the photo mode, you have something called pre-AF, which basically says don't run the autofocus motor of the lens unless the camera is recording, or in photo it would be like if you have the shutter pressed down halfway, or if you have back button focus set up, you're holding your focus. So with the R5C in video mode, the autofocus is always running the lens motor, and you can disable it in the menus, but that's something you have to go in the menus to, and it's not a selectable option for one of the customization buttons. So you can't have one button push to turn autofocus on and off. You have to actually go in the menus, turn it on and off. Now, with most lenses, you obviously have the AF-MF switch, which does work, but on some lenses you don't have that, and it's just one more thing. I can't tell you how many times I've started recording and realized I was in manual focus, and I had to flip the switch and then start recording because I was shutting it off because I was messing with the menus and it was constantly running the autofocus motor. The next thing, I feel like the R5C is the first RF mount camera that has some pretty severe limitations if you aren't using RF glass. So there are a lot of autofocus settings and some other auto settings in the menus of the R5C that are disabled if you aren't using an RF mount lens. So for example, some of the autofocus customization and some of the things that make the autofocus work a little bit better on the R5C is to turn up the AF speed and the responsiveness. Well, that is only something that's supported on RF lenses, and I think some like very recent EF lenses on the adapter. But I have a handful of EF lenses. I have a Tamron and I have a Sigma, and neither of them can change the speed or the responsiveness, so you're kind of stuck set with whatever it's giving you. And in a lot of cases, the AF performance on my Sigma lens is kind of slow, even though on the R5, R6, it performs great. In video mode on the R5C, it's slow because you can't change any of those settings. So I feel like the R5C, we're first starting to see the limitations of the EF adapted lenses. So if you get an R5C, you might want to consider switching out for RF lenses, which is a lot more money. So it might be kind of an indication of the way things are going to go in the future, because there's a second thing that is limited on the EF lenses. So that is my next point. So the R5C has an automatic aperture mode. So you can go into the settings and you can say do auto iris, and that is something that's also only supported on RF lenses. So on my Sigma lenses, my Tamron lenses, some of my older EF lenses, it says auto iris isn't supported in the menus when you have that lens on the camera. There is an auto iris one push button to get a single like re-exposure with iris, and that works. But to set it up auto, it doesn't work. So since there's no automatic shutter speed or shutter angle on the R5C, that leaves the only automatic option you have as being ISO. So if you're okay with auto ISO, then you can still get somewhat of an automatic exposure, but you're limited if you're using the older EF lenses. Okay, the next one. So there are no options in the menus to change the levels of the built-in microphone on the R5C. So every single audio option is completely disabled when there's not an external microphone plugged in or one on the new hot shoe. So the R5C has the new hot shoe mount that has communication for audio devices, but your audio settings are completely limited to when you have something plugged in. And another point of that is that when you are recording on a microphone, when you plug a microphone in, so for example, I have the Deity D3, when you plug that in and you record, you can change the settings of the Deity microphone, but you can't change the settings of the built-in microphone. And it always records 4 tracks of audio. So you always get 1 channel, 2 channel as your whatever's plugged in your microphone jack, and then 3 and 4 are the built-in microphone of the R5C, which is fine, except there are some instances when you want to do instant deliverables, where if you hand that off to somebody who's unaware of what's going on, you have all 4 audio channels playing at once. Or let's say you're in like an inferior editor like Filmora will only give you the ability to have all the audio tracks playing, so it's going to get confusing when you go to edit your files if you're not using like an advanced video editor. And I guess like not a lot of people are going to be using like non-advanced video editors when they're using the R5C, but I do have an exception personally to that, and I'll explain that because there's another problem that kind of relates to the instant deliverables. The next thing that I noticed, and as soon as I took my R5C out of the box, plugged the battery in, and turned it on, I could hear the fan running. See, there's the autofocus motor going on that lens. So I'm going to turn to manual focus, but I could hear the fan going right away, right? But if you gyrate the camera, I don't know if the microphone will pick that up or not. But the fan kind of like makes a little bit of a grinding noise. And you don't hear it even if you have the microphone or the internal microphone. And, like it doesn't ever come across in any recordings or anything. But it just worried me when I got the camera and I first like turned it on and I was like playing with it and I was like, wow, this is a fan bad, and I started looking and talked to people on forums, and everyone's like, they all do that. They just use kind of a cheap fan, which, like this is a pretty expensive camera. So I guess we'll see how long the fan lasts. But at this point, I guess it's not a big deal because if the fan dies in, set amount of time, it'll be replaced under warranty. But who knows? Maybe, fans are going to be dying on the R5C. We'll see. So the next thing that I found is related to white balance on the camera. So as far as I can tell, there's not a way to lock the auto white balance setting. So if you are trying to, for example, use an ND filter and you want the auto white balance to compensate for the color shift of the ND filter, there's no way to lock the auto white balance setting to whatever the reading is. So you can go and you can select your presets like daylight, tungsten, whatever, or you can set a Kelvin value. But the Kelvin value is only the blue yellow, it's not the green magenta. And the green magenta is where a lot of the shifts are for like ND filters. So there's a button that you can push. There's custom A and custom B for white balance. There's a button you can push and that takes a reading, but that is only programmed to take a reading off of something white or something gray. So I was hoping that you could like go to A and then press the button on like any scene and then it would give you a good white balance reading, but it doesn't. It's always totally off unless you're holding something gray or white up to the camera. So in a situation like, for example, I have some Freewell ND filters and they have a pretty nasty green shift. The only way that I can compensate out that green shift is to just leave the camera on auto white balance. So on my Sony cameras, there was a lot of granularity where you could like get a little chart and you could set your white balance and you could adjust it. So you could like kick it up like +1 magenta or, you know, whatever on the little chart. With this one, as far as I can tell, you can't do that. So you're basically set to either Kelvin, you're set to auto white balance, or you're set to one of the presets. So I wish there was a little bit more customization there that you could do for white balance, but it just kind of reinforces the fact that you should be bringing a gray card with you to set your white balance on pretty much any scene. My next 2 points are kind of obvious if you think about it, but you know, like if it's something that you are wondering, then I'll tell you. And I mean, I guess it's something that I realized, so I was like, oh, that's kind of a bummer, so I guess it's worth mentioning. The first thing is that when you are recording in RAW, when you're recording in 8K RAW, you can't use the digital image stabilization. So the digital image stabilization is limited to the non-RAW modes. You can use the built-in image stabilization if you have a lens. And then the other part about RAW is you can only record 8K RAW. So I was thinking, you know, oh, hey, maybe one of the things that I'll do with the R5C is do 4K RAW. You know, then you can still mess with all of the, you know, white balance in post, and you have all of the advanced features of RAW, but it would only be in 4K, so maybe have lower file sizes. It's all 8K. So if you're recording in RAW, you're going to be recording in 8K, which is a little bit of a bummer because if you want to use C-Log 2, when you're going into DaVinci Resolve and you want to change the RAW processing to C-Log 2, you have to do that in the 8K RAW. And the 8K RAW has all of its other limitations, which we all know about. I don't even have that in this video because, you know, like with the battery issues and, you know, finding an external power supply, which I have a link to a video where I found a really good solution for an external power supply, but I didn't include that in this video because I knew that going into the camera. So the next thing, and this is the point I was touching on a little bit ago with instant deliverables. So one of my friends does YouTube with me and I film YouTube for him pretty often. And he edits in Filmora. And Filmora, if some of you don't know, is just like an iMovie replacement or like a Windows Movie Maker replacement. It's just kind of like a low barrier of entry video editing software. So along with the issue with getting the 4 audio tracks, you can't do H.264 10-bit. There's no codec for it. If you want to do H.264, it's 8-bit. So that creates an issue for my friend because he likes to edit on H.264 because his computer can't handle H.265. So if I record video, just standard Rec 709 on the R5C and then hand it over to him, it's going to be H.265. And H.265 is not going to be what he wants. So I wish you could do 10-bit H.264, but it's just not an option. Now, if that's going to cause an issue for anybody else, I don't know. But in my specific case, it's a little bit of a pain. Okay, so the next thing that is bothering me a little bit is the fact that there are a lot of monitoring tools built into the R5C, but I feel like some of them are like half-baked, and it kind of bugs me because it's one of those things where, you know, sometimes you feel like the people who design software aren't the end users of the software. And you see that more and more often with, you know, like modern software, and you think, you know, like if someone who is using this, you know, actually was designing the software, things might be a little bit different. And I feel like that's kind of what these are. But, you know, like that's not ever something I would have expected from Canon. So anyway, if you're setting zebras to get like good skin exposure, so I like to set my zebras like 50, 55 IRE, you only have plus or minus 5 sensitivity, whereas coming from Sony cameras, you could take that, you know, from 1 to 10 sensitivity. So that's the range that the zebras will show up in. On Canon, when you have zebras enabled, you get 5. That's it. So you don't have that granular sensitivity to say, you know, like I want the zebras to only show up at like, you know, 55 IRE. So I feel like that's a little bit of a missed opportunity, because the next thing is one of the things I was super excited about with this camera was that it was going to have false color. And the false color is almost completely useless because it has such a wide range in the middle where your skin tones sit that are just gray. And if you go and look at the chart, it shows you, you know, like you have like this whole, I think it's almost from like 30% to like 60% or something is gray. So that doesn't make any sense to me, because you would want to, first of all, be able to maybe adjust that. Like all the monitors I've had, even the cheap ones, they have like different settings so you can change the false color, you know, like what it's reading. So like, or just make it so that there's not two grays that are like up next to each other. If you turn on false color, I feel like you can't tell where skin tones are at, and that's why you have to use zebras, but then the zebras only have the 5% thing. So I feel like there's almost no way to accurately measure your skin tones on the camera, which is kind of a bummer. And, you know, using the two things in combination, you can kind of get pretty close to where you want, and, you know, like you can work around it. But, you know, like if the false color was perfect, you could just use the false color and you'd be fine. Or if the zebras had the more granular settings, you could just use the zebras and you'd be good. So I just don't understand some of the choices on how those monitoring tools are set up. This last thing, I kind of discovered by accident, but I had a CF Express Type B card, but I didn't have a CF Express Type B card reader, and I ordered one, but it got delayed in shipping. So I had the camera for probably a week before my CF Express Type B card reader came in. And I found out in that time that you cannot get any XAVC-S files or raw video files off of the camera via USB. So if you plug the camera into USB, you can see the MP4 video files, which are going to be your H.264, H.265. You can see those, and you can see the photos, but the raw video and the XAVC-S files aren't there. You just can't see them on the card. The files are on the card, but when you plug in the camera, you just can't see them on the computer. And I tried it on a Windows PC. I tried it on a Mac. I tried downloading the Canon transfer software for Mac and PC. You just can't do it. So for whatever reason, I feel like that's just a complete oversight on the part of the firmware of this camera, but that's the way it is right now. So you absolutely have to have a card reader if you want to get your raw video or your XAVCS files off of it. And then to try and get a workaround of that, I was trying to connect the camera to FTP. So if you connect the camera to FTP, and I used to do this on my photo cams all the time, you can create an FTP server on your computer and you can have the camera send photos to your FTP server. So I was like, well, maybe I can get the video files off of the camera via FTP. So I went into video mode, and if you go to the network icon on this camera, video or the network settings are completely disabled. So it acts like in video mode, the camera has 0 network capabilities. You can't connect to Wi-Fi, you can't turn on Bluetooth, you can't do anything. And it says in the manual that it requires the $1,000 battery grip to use Wi-Fi settings on the video side of this camera, which is really frustrating because if you flip it into photo mode, you can connect to Wi-Fi, you can connect to the phone app. So the camera has Wi-Fi radios built into it, but you are completely locked out of all Wi-Fi settings when you are in the video mode. So I feel like that could be very easily fixed in a firmware update. Guys, well, I am going to be very surprised if you watched through all of that because I feel like I was just rambling on and on, but if you did, I appreciate it. Like I said before, I in no way think that the R5C is a bad camera. Those are just kind of the things that I discovered. If any of those are extreme user error, please let me know in the comments, and I would love to discuss it with you, but I checked them out pretty well before I made the video, and I don't think they are. So I hope you found that helpful, and I hope it helped you make a purchase decision with the R5C. If you have any questions, or if you have anything you would like me to test on the R5C, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. And please give this video a like if you found it helpful, and subscribe to my channel.